evening, welcome to the program. There's no doubt Malcolm Turnbull is one of Parliament's strongest performers. When he's on his feet in Parliament or in the hot seat during an interview, there are few better. And he's also someone who rarely takes criticism lying down. But has Malcolm Turnbull overreacted to the taunts of Conservative commentators that he's been advertising his wares, not doing enough to help sell this budget, and effectively undermining or destabilising Prime Minister Tony Abbott? Well, Malcolm Turnbull rejects that utterly. He says he backs this budget 100% and backs the leadership of the Prime Minister 100%. So has he overreacted to the likes of Alan Jones and Andrew Bolt this week? And has this distraction hurt the government's efforts to turn around its position in the polling as it struggles to sell this budget? Tonight we're joined by Steve Ciobo, who is the Parliamentary Secretary to the Treasurer, Sam Crosbie, the Executive Director of the Labor-aligned McKell Institute, Julian Leeser, the former head of the Liberal-aligned Menzies Research Centre and the Shadow Minister for Citizenship, Multiculturalism, and the Assistant Shadow Minister for Communications, Michelle Rowland. Welcome to you all. Let's start with Malcolm Turnbull. Do you think, Steve Ciobo, he has been unfairly attacked?
Look, I absolutely do, David, but more fundamentally than that, this is nothing but a carnival sideshow by certain elements. It is not in any way, shape or form a focus of the government, nor is it in any way, shape or form something that, frankly, I want to spend much time talking about, because as far as
I can understand that, but the carnival sideshow, as you call it, are you saying that Alan Jones and Andrew Bolt in particular are creating trouble for the government?
What I'm saying is that as a government we are focused on the job that we're elected to do. I wouldn't care less if we never discuss this kind of rubbish again, because it is absolute rubbish. You've got it from Malcolm, you've got it from the Prime Minister, you've got it from the Treasury, you're getting it from me. I don't know how many of us in government can say it. Our focus is upon doing what we were elected to do, to pay down debt, to restore the budget, to build the roads of the 21st century, to stop the boats. That's what we're focused on, and frankly, if others want to talk about other things, well, knock themselves out. Zero interest on the part of the
government. Tonight, Malcolm Turnbull has said, when asked whether this has been a coordinated attack on him from Alan Jones and Andrew Bolt, he said that you could form that view, although he doesn't think this has been coordinated by the Prime Minister. Do you think it's been coordinated by anyone?
I certainly don't. I don't, not for 1 second. And I repeat again, David, this is not a focus for me. It's not a focus for the government. It's not a focus for Malcolm Turnbull. I understand there are others who want to sort of try to propel themselves up by talking about it, but it's not something that any of us are focused on.
Julian, let me bring you in here. At the heart of the critique that's been made is that as Tony Abbott struggles in the polls, he's had a dip in the polls, there is Malcolm Turnbull having dinner with Clive Palmer, advertising his wares in various media performances, ensuring that he is going to be the story of the day. Do you think this is hurting the government?
I think that's the most malevolent view of what's happened here. I mean, Malcolm had dinner with Clive Palmer. He explained why he had dinner with Clive Palmer. The purpose of the dinner was just to talk about things. I mean, you know, you're in government. You have to, at some point, reach out to people in other parties to get your legislation passed. That seemed to be a reasonable thing to do. I don't see this whole thing as anything more than a big storm in a teacup.
Is there always going to be a level of interest in Malcolm Turnbull and his ambitions, given he's a former leader? He's also still more popular in any opinion poll than Tony Abbott and the rest of them, and he is always a very engaging person to watch.
Malcolm Turnbull's an excellent character to watch. He's an excellent contributor to the Parliament. He's, as you said earlier, excellent in interviews, and I think people will always be interested in the contribution that he makes more broadly. But, you know, he said this evening he has no further ambitions in relation to leadership. I think he's doing a great job in the communications portfolio. He knows more about communications issues than anyone else in the Parliament. He's perfect for the role, and I think I believe him when he says that he supports Tony Abbott, and they have a long history together. You go back to the time when they were in the Republic debate together. Even though they were on opposite sides, Malcolm, in his book The Reluctant Republic, wrote of Tony Abbott that he was the real key difference in turning the monarchist movement from a sort of collection of Sydney lawyers to a political machine.
Michelle Rowland, let me ask you, as someone who is, as I said, the Assistant Shadow Minister for Communication, so you do line up against Malcolm Turnbull in the portfolio sense. How do you actually view him as an opponent, as a parliamentarian, as a politician?
I view everyone in the Parliament as my equal. And I believe that I have an excellent knowledge in this area based on my experience in my former life, but also the fact that I'm very willing to engage on these issues. Even in my first term in Parliament, I was very prepared to take on Malcolm Turnbull in the Parliament on the issue of the NBN and other communications-related matters. It's difficult in this sense to really understand what his strategy is here. On one hand, he says that he doesn't want the attention, he wants it to go away, and we hear our speakers tonight saying the same thing. He's still feeding it, though. The fact is, we're still talking about this rather than talking about the budget. I'm very happy to talk about this policy and budget failings. If
there was really nothing to see here, he'd be ignoring this.
Absolutely, he'd be ignoring it. Instead, he's feeding it. And, I take issue with, there's one thing I would like to take issue here about Malcolm, and that is, he makes the accusation about someone that someone can dish it out and can't take it. Well, Malcolm Turnbull needs a mirror. He needs a mirror. Because when the going gets a bit tough, when people start calling him out on policy issues, he turns to name-calling, he turns not into the adult in charge, which he says he is and professes to be. Instead, he turns into name-calling. So if he wants to talk about dishing it out and taking it, he needs a mirror.
All right, Sam, let me bring you in. Malcolm Turnbull did, during that interview with Alan Jones this morning, suggest that this government is more united than any we've seen. There is something in that, though, isn't there? After the last 6 years of Rudd and Gillard, the Howard Costello tensions that we saw for many years, and even the Hawke Keating tensions before that. I know it's very early days in the Abbott government, but it's not like they're that divided.
Sure. Let's look at it, though. On one of the first trips the Prime Minister takes this year internationally, that's the day that Malcolm Turnbull decides that's the day he's going to go on the highest rating radio talkback program that morning, talk to the Liberal base on Alan Jones's radio talkback program. That night, tonight, he goes on the highest rating current affairs news program and again talks to the broader community about leadership and about all other things, really other than the NBN that was tacked on to the end of that interview. I mean, at one point, when asked about his leadership aspirations, he said politics is an unpredictable business. Now, if Kevin Rudd used to leave the door ajar on that sort of talk, I think Malcolm Turnbull's just ripped it off its hinges tonight.
Steve, I'll let you respond to that.
Frankly, David, it's entirely predictable, but frankly quite pathetic. I mean, if he doesn't say anything, they'd be here saying, well, he's not said anything, so clearly he's got something to hide. If he does say something, then they're saying, oh, well, he's said something, he's overreacting. I mean, for goodness sake. You've got it from the horse's mouth. You've got it from the Prime Minister. You're getting it from me. You're getting it from every single member of the government. We are not focused on this. This is not part of our attention. And I want to encourage Michelle and Sam and whoever else wants to talk about it as much as they want. Talk themselves to their blue in the face. We don't care. It's not what we're focused on, and I don't think it's what the Australian people are focused on.
Why do you think there are always leadership questions around Malcolm Turnbull in the way there were around Kevin Rudd?
I don't think there are. What I think there is an appetite from the Australian media
this is just the media. Malcolm Turnbull himself has admitted in interviews today, people when they see him, they always ask, when are you coming back to... He's always top of the polls in terms of favourite Liberals.
David, I guarantee you that when Anthony Albanese, who let's not forget was the people's choice when it came to Labor's leadership, I have no doubt that people say to Anthony Albanese, when are you replacing Shorten? Shorten's useless.
I'm sure Albanese doesn't get on TV and go and talk about it every day.
Well, because frankly, no one's really interested in what he's got to say. but from my perspective, I think that the issue is this: there is always an appetite from the media. Understandably, I'm not being on the attack with this. There's colour, movement, light, the media are there, and that's understandable. All I can do as a member of the government is make it crystal clear, as Malcolm has done, as the Prime Minister have done, as the Treasurer's done, that this is not something any of us are focused on. And frankly, I think in 24 hours this will be as dead as a dodo.
Well, you're right in that Liberals aren't talking about the leadership. There's no appetite for a leadership change. So why then is this coming up from two leading Conservative commentators?
Well, I don't know. I wish I did. And I think that there's that same sort of quizzical notion that Malcolm has, that the Prime Minister has. I mean, I think, frankly, most Liberals are scratching their heads and going, why are they talking about this? None of us are talking about it. And so, as far as we're concerned, neither should they.
Of course, the heart of a lot of this has been that dinner with Clive Palmer. I want to talk about Clive Palmer, who's also, of course, been making headlines this week for a rather insulting and offensive attack on Peter Cretland, the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff. Michelle Rowland, let me ask you, what did you make of what he had to say, suggesting that the Prime Minister's paid parental leave scheme, which I know you're critical of, was only there to help Peter Cretland if she got pregnant?
I thought his comment was completely inappropriate. He withdrew, but he should have apologised immediately as well. Staff members should never be brought into this matters, and it was factually incorrect in any event. So I thought it was entirely inappropriate, and it should not have been said.
Was it sexist?
Look, I think it was. I think it was. If that was a male Chief of Staff, I doubt that would have been said, and that's for me the test, and it should not have been said.
Julian, what do you think it's told us about the character, the style of Clive Palmer?
I think the whole country is waiting for Clive Palmer to actually outline a philosophy and a program and some information about where he's going to go with the government's budget bills. I think that's what people are really interested in, where he's going to go on a whole range of policy issues. And I think he should focus on the policy questions, not on all of these other sort of issues.
I just take that up, though. I think a lot of us and those who follow politics closely would be interested in where he's going to land on the policy front when it comes to a vote. Do you agree, though, that there's a lot of people in the electorate out there who are attracted to the superficiality of the sideshow alley stuff that often surrounds him?
Well, yes, look, he's a sort of an interesting character in the way that people follow cats on the internet, on YouTube. I mean, it's the same sort of thing. People will watch all sorts of bizarre things. But I think he's got a serious job to do. He's the leader of a party that may have the balance of power in the Senate, and I think he's therefore got to step up and take responsibility and exercise that power responsibly.
Was this comment of his this week, Steve Ciobo, a moment at which some in the government decide the gloves have to come off with this guy?
Look, Clive Palmer is going to play a very influential role in the sense that he will hold, to some extent, a balance of power position in the upper house. And that's precisely the reason why, as a government, we need to engage with him in the same way that we need to engage with the Greens, and we need to engage with the Labor Party. We have a mandate that we're seeking to get through from the Australian people. From my perspective, his comments this week were consistent with a man who I think is all about the headline, and frankly, that's the same reason why he turns up in $500,000 vehicles and all this sort of rubbish.
And a different one every day.
And a different one every day. I mean, it's all about Clive, and it's all about making a song and a dance, and so I think that this was entirely consistent with his character, because I don't think there's anything in terms of substance to this bloke. But unfortunately, of course, we've got to engage with him, so we'll need to do that. His comments were completely tasteless, and I'm grateful that Michelle repudiated it so strongly, as it should have been.
I think everyone agrees on that, Sam, don't they? But absolutely. The policy positions he's taking, they're populist. They're also very much in line with Labor's position on these budget measures, aren't they?
Well, they are today. I don't know what they're going to be tomorrow. I think we saw on the 7:30 report yesterday when he flat out denied that he mentioned anything about a pregnancy, despite there being numerous B-roll footage of him talking about a pregnancy. So he has a habit of, when he doesn't like what he said, just erasing that and moving on to tomorrow's story or the next big thing or the next car that he's going to drive into Parliament the next day. So, sure, at the moment he's saying things that I'm sure Michelle and the Labor Party are pleased to hear about.
So you're not confident that he'll necessarily vote that way when it comes to the crunch?
I'm not. I think he's playing a negotiating game to get more staff for himself and for his party. And if that happens, I don't know what's going to get sold down the river first.
We might take a break then get into some of those particular budget measures. There's quite a number of them that do look like being defeated in the Parliament if indeed Clive Palmer is true to his word. Stay with us, we'll be right back. Good Good to have you with us tonight. We're talking to Steve Ciobo, the Parliamentary Secretary to the Treasurer, Sam Crosby, the Executive Director of the McKell Institute, Julian Leeser, former Head of the Menzies Research Centre, and the Shadow Minister for Citizenship and Multiculturalism, Michelle Rowland. I want to turn to the economy and the budget. This week we saw some pretty strong figures on the economy, growing in the first 3 months of the year by 1.1%, 3.5% annually. Surprisingly strong. Who deserves the credit for that? Michelle Rowland, do you give the government credit for how the economy's going?
Well, look, it's always good to see growth, and we've had many years of consecutive growth, which is a great thing for Australia. And I think I'm not into talking the economy down, and I think it points to a couple of things, though. First, when you look at a couple of the things that aren't so good in there, business confidence and consumer confidence are down. It's very clear that consumers are concerned about this budget. It's also very clear that business is. And I think that they point to some...
David Gruen from Treasury told estimates last night, I think it was, there has been no noticeable impact on consumer confidence from the budget.
Well, even today we've seen figures about consumer confidence, and when you take all that into account and the impact of the budget and the way people are responding to it out in the community, it is a cause for concern. And I think it highlights the issue that we need to focus on productivity in this country. When you look at the amount of GDP growth that's coming from the mining sector, we need to be sure that we're transitioning that in a smart economy that's focused on innovation, that's focused on productivity coming through ICT development in particular.
Well, how do you transition that? I mean, that's kind of what the government's trying to do with the road spending that's in this budget, to see the workforce shift from mining construction into road construction.
Sure, well, infrastructure spend is one thing, but you need to have people that are actually capable of building that infrastructure. And that leads to the issue of focusing on education and focusing on trades. And in this area in the budget, it is not a budget that is conducive to having smarter people, to having people who are coming through the apprentice system and people who are employable in those areas.
Well, Steve Ciobo, let me come back to that original question about the economy.
Sure.
In the first few months of this year, do you give Labor any credit for the strength of the economy in those few months? Because a lot of your policy changes haven't happened yet.
Sure. Well, Labor didn't do everything wrong. There's a news flash for you. Not every single thing Labor did was wrong. So I am very happy to concede.
I'm sure that'll appear in the next election.
I'm very happy to concede that Labor did do some things and the economy kept ticking along. Our gripe has always been, though, that Labor's approach has been to see massive overspending, a lot of waste, a lot of reckless spending. And the consequence of all of that spending was that we had a situation where Australia had a debt trajectory much worse than other advanced economies around the world in terms of the pace of growth. Labor was not keeping within the parameters they set themselves in terms of real growth and expenditure. And as a consequence of that approach, and as a consequence of that reckless spending, Australia was on a pathway to reach $667 billion of debt. So that's the context we talk about the budgetary crisis that Australia faced. So, yes, there were some fundamentals that were there, but what we've done since our election is make sure that we've given additional confidence back to consumers. We saw that in terms of home prices, we saw that in terms of consumer confidence and business confidence. And so I think that the two together, i.e. some of their fundamentals and what we've done subsequently, have brought about the kind of strong growth that we're seeing now.
I think both sides agree on this productivity question and issue that Michelle Rowland, you raised there. This is the way to improve our economic performance. But what does that mean in practice? What needs to be done to improve that productivity, Sam?
Well, the good news is Labor productivity is up. Labor productivity, just as Wayne Swan and Julie Gillard and Kevin Rudd said, it would happen that these things are cyclical and it plateaus for a while and then it increases dramatically. So that's good news. And I think we can all say that therefore doesn't need to be any changes to the industrial relations system, and we're managing to achieve these gains in productivity under the existing. But
to be clear, are you saying we don't need any further productivity improvement?
No, of course not. Of course not. There's always greater gains that can be made.
So how do you make them? Because this is clearly key to dealing with the pressures that are there.
Sure. I think everyone can agree that education is one of the core drivers.
Well, can they? Steve Ciobo, I mean, you guys are... I'm going to use the word cutting, but I know you'll say we're not cutting, we're increasing at a lower rate, but you are taking money away from education.
Well, no, we're not. We're actually
Allocated money from
if you look at, well, let's just deal with this, because I mean, Labor runs this line that we're cutting education
by 20%.
False.
Right, you are saving
$80
billion.
You look at the allocation of funding for education in the budget papers, there's actually an extra $1.2 billion in the budget papers. So let's reject entirely this notion.
As you know, the budget overview,
I think it's an important point.
The budget overview, the key document, page 8 or 10, says we are saving $80 billion in school and hospital
There was
funding.
no money there from the Labor Party. The money was never there. All there was this grand aspiration that one day Labor, because Labor could write whatever they wanted to. If they wanted to put $150 billion, they could put that there, because you know what? Right. It meant nothing because they had no money there.
But to Sam's point, is education a way of boosting productivity?
Of course it is, and that is the reason why we are extending the operation of education. I mean, for the first time, we're providing, Michelle raised trades training, for example, we're providing grants of up to $20,000 as loans for training in those areas. I mean, we are wanting to make sure that we get a responsive market-based approach to tertiary education, be it vocational education, be it a diploma, be it a degree, and ultimately that, of course, is going to play through to the skill set and the skill base of the Australian population.
Just on that, isn't this point right, that making that level of education, and particularly at the sub-degree level, more widely available through Commonwealth support, a good way of dealing with the skills?
It's not being made more widely available.
Well, Commonwealth support is being made available
but
to
if you look,
advanced diplomas and those sort of sub-degree courses.
But if you look overall at the vocation sector, just that sector, if you look at how we are supposed to be improving the employability of young people, measures such as getting rid of partnership brokers, the ones who are supposed to place students who are doing courses in their final secondary years at school, those have all been removed. Now, I can speak from experience in this because I've had high schools in my electorate contact me and say they can no longer offer these vet courses to their young people. These are people who aren't and who recognise they're probably not suited to a university education and want to pursue a trade. They can't offer these courses anymore because they simply don't have the capacity to place these young people in the placements that they're supposed to as part of their degree. That is not opening it up to more people. That is quite clearly making it less attractive for young people to get into these trades.
Julian, get back to this productivity question. How do you think productivity can be improved?
Well, I disagree with Sam. I think that you've got a Productivity Commission inquiry looking at workplace relations questions. I don't think you should ever shut the door on a particular aspect of productivity reform. I think you've got to constantly review these things. One of the things that the government's doing is infrastructure improvement. Living in Sydney, the roads are clogged constantly, and that's why they're trying to build West Connects and North Connects and a whole range of other infrastructure here, which will provide both jobs but will also increase the productivity because it'll cut down travel times for both commuters and people who are shipping goods from place to place. I mean, I think that's the sort of thing that you've got to do. You've got to also look at individual sectors of the economy. The building industry is not as productive as it could be, and one of the reasons it's not is because, as we know, the union intimidation continues on building sites, particularly in Victoria, and that's why it's important that the ABCC comes back.
And back on your initial point there about industrial relations, that you shouldn't shut the door on that. There is a debate about penalty rates in particular for Sunday shifts in retail and hospitality. Can we have a sensible debate about this, Steve Ciobo? Would you get behind a push to do something about that?
Well, that's a decision, obviously, of the Fair Work Commission, what's going to happen with penalty rates. To go to your question, can we have a sensible debate about it? I'm not sure we can, unfortunately. As a member of the coalition, I can't mention the words industrial relations without, unfortunately, some Labor person jumping up and saying, work choices, they've got plans to bring back work choices. I mean, I know that... I know work choices? He says it tongue in jest, but unfortunately we've heard that refrain time in, time out in the Parliament. I mean, even for goodness sake, what was it, about 3 days ago, we had Labor members in an orchestrated attempt in the Parliament all holding up work choices mouse pads. I mean, that just underscores that I think, frankly, the Labor Party doesn't have the maturity to have this discussion.
The reality, though, is that it's worked, that campaign.
That's what I'm saying.
It spooked you guys into not not doing anything, not saying anything, you're not even saying penalty rates should be watered down.
Well, what I said was it's a decision of the Fair Work Commission. It's that body that makes the decision. Why can't you sit here as a Liberal MP and say, you know what, penalty rates, we've got to do something about it? I'll tell you this, David. The higher the penalty rates, the more expensive you make it to employ a person, the fewer jobs there are in the marketplace. It's that simple. So the Labor Party can run around and tell everyone how much better they're doing as a consequence of having higher penalty rates, but I'll tell you what it's not doing. It's not creating employment. In fact, it's a disincentive for people to be employed. Fundamental.
I actually think this is quite misguided, focusing just on this issue. When time and time again, studies have shown and countries have proven that the single biggest driver of productivity in an economy is ICT investment. And I listened to comments about infrastructure. Well, infrastructure also should include investments in ICT, the national broadband network. These are the sorts of things that Australia should be looking to do and future-proof this country to make sure that we do have high levels of productivity. You don't just have to take it from me. You can even see access economics, a number of studies that were done by the previous government, all showing the same thing.
Right now, if you're running a small business, maybe a clothes shop or a hairdresser, if you have to pay those penalty rates on a Sunday, that is an added cost to employment, isn't it? Do you think there's scope for at least looking at how those penalty rates can be better tailored?
Well, the question is, are you going to employ more people? Are more people going to be employed as a result? I actually question whether that is going to end up being a result.
You think small business owners just want to pocket the extra cash?
I'm not saying that at all, but I think it's misguided to assume that by cutting penalty rates, you automatically lead to an increase in employment.
Well, surely that is the fundamental point here, isn't it? It's whether you believe that small business want to employ more or not.
Well, I don't know that...
And you talk to small business owners, I'm sure, in your electorate, a lot of them would say yes.
I certainly do. And I can tell you, small business owners are concerned about a lot of issues to do with this budget. They're concerned about a lot of matters.
On this issue, are you suggesting, though, that if they have more money in their pocket, they'll just keep it in their pocket? They don't want to employ more?
I'm not making a blanket assessment on small business as a whole, but I think it would be misguided to assume that simply by driving down wages, you are going to increase employment.
It's not driving down wages, though. I mean, I think the thing is not only would small business employ people more, but they provide more services. There are plenty of people in the hospitality industry now who don't open their businesses on a Sunday because it's just too expensive. And that, we are an international city in Sydney, and we're a global competitor. We need to be able to provide services for people every day. A lot of people who work in the hospitality industry do so on a part-time basis, a lot of students and so on.
Yes, but this is the point. It is a bit of a conundrum in a way that there'd be people with children at school, right? If they lose their weekend, and yes, they might get Monday and Tuesday off, but if they don't have Saturday and Sunday off, they're not going to have that time with their kids, right? But there's a lot of students, as you say, who, so what? They shouldn't get an extra load.
And this is the problem with a highly centralised system.
So how do you tackle that?
Well, you want to have greater flexibility so people can make arrangements. So if you've got a mum with kids who's working 7 days a week, if you're the employer and you value her wage, or you've got a dad in the same situation, you can pay them accordingly.
But isn't she going to be undercut by the student who doesn't care about the Sunday rate?
It depends on the loyalty and the quality of the service. If you've got somebody who's working for you 7 days a week and they're really good...
Is that quality of service going to make the difference between a salary of this and a salary of that?
Well, you want a reliability of service too. And, you want to have flexibility. For some people, they might say, well, we'll employ you 6 days and on the 7th day we'll get in a student. I mean, you want to give people the flexibility to run their own businesses at the end of the day.
This is really a second-order issue at the end of the day. Consumer confidence is at 1991 recession levels. It's at an all-time low. It doesn't matter if the shops are open. No one's buying. No one's got the confidence to go out there and spend their dollars and keep their shops open. So it's a second-order issue. First, we've got to look at the budget, and we've got to figure out what's actually going to get through and how badly is this going to hurt the ordinary Australian. And then we can start looking at these issues down the line.
Well, let's look at that then. Let's look at the budget measures. I know you're itching to argue the case for them. The $7 GP co-payment in particular is one that's opposed by Labor, the Greens and the Palmer United Party. Surely there's room for compromise here on who it applies to, and what rate it's going to be, and indeed where the money gets spent.
You know, David, as a government, we've looked at some things that the Labor Party has done. As I said, not everything Labor does is wrong. Labor introduced a co-payment on pharmaceuticals. Labor's got a co-payment on pharmaceuticals. They seem perfectly comfortable with having a co-payment on pharmaceuticals. In fact, the Shadow Assistant Treasurer makes the compelling point as part of his academic studies and his subsequent op-ed in the Sydney Morning Herald.
Says he doesn't believe
that, well, you know, he'll say whatever he needs to say now, but makes the point that there's got to be a price attached to a service. If there's no price attached, it gets abused. And so we've set a $7 co-payment.
But this isn't so much about
nets.
reducing the use of GP services, is it? Because I think you've only budgeted that it's going to reduce it by 1%.
No, well, it's about reducing the abuse of services.
By
it's
1%?
about asking.
Seeing a doctor?
Here's a shock horror. Not everyone goes to the doctor for a valid reason. Scandalous, I know, but it is actually a fact.
And they're the people we should be targeting.
All those people go for fun, I reckon.
these
They're all
people
going
are
for
using
fun.
the
All those
system.
people with chronic diabetes.
Yeah,
They just
but
want a good day out.
This is part of the problem, David. I mean, the Labor would have people believe that as a Liberal, I'm sitting here saying, well, how can I persecute those people with diabetes? I mean, for goodness sake. Seriously.
So who are you talking about?
Who are these people that go to the doctor for fun?
You know, I could pull up on my phone right now an email from a pensioner that I got who lives in an aged care facility. He said, I agree with the co-payment because I believe and I know a lot of elderly people go to the doctor out of a sense of isolation and the chance to talk to someone. And that's just one example.
So pensions.
I've had no, don't be so silly
come on,
with
I
that
mean,
sort of interjection.
But come on, I mean,
we've also got
you're
examples
saying
from
that old
doctors
people are
where
using
we've got
it
a
for a chat.
situation where they talk about, for example, in Queensland, I've had ambulance drivers tell me in Queensland where they will get a regular phone call from a person asking to be picked up, who'll then transport that person to the hospital, and guess what? That person walks out of the emergency department and goes down the road and does their shopping because there's no cost associated with taking an ambulance.
But,
So,
okay,
you know,
but just
unfortunately,
the scale of this problem you're
it happens.
identifying, sure, there are no doubt examples where that happens, but is the scale of it worth doing what you're doing? Because, as I say, you're only budgeting to reduce doctor visits by 1%.
Well, David, I think it is an important matter of principle. In the same way that Labor thought it was an important matter of principle to have a co-payment on pharmaceuticals,
Is a principle
we think
like
this
that,
is an
though,
important matter
really
of principle.
worth the political pain that you're suffering over this? Because I question that.
It's part of a suite of measures the government's put forward to try to reverse a situation that Australia was faced
But
with.
this, hang on, you're talking about debt there.
Correct.
This isn't going to help debt. All the $7 payments are going to go into a fund for medical research. I just wonder, the political thinking behind this, you're copping it over this issue, as you know, and what's it going to achieve? It's not going to pay down debt. It's only going to save doctor visits by 1%. And yes, a medical research fund would be great. But is it working out for you, this issue?
I think you're being a little too dismissive of the fact that our aspiration is for Australia to have the largest research endowment fund in the world. I mean, let's not be quite so quick to write off what $1 billion a year into research could yield for this nation. I mean, I see people just sort of drawing a line through it and flippantly saying, oh, who cares? We're talking about the biggest medical research fund on the planet. We don't know what that's going to lead to. We don't know what advances are going to flow from that.
20
And
years
I
down
think
the
that
track or
asking
30 years
people,
down the
well,
track.
frankly, you wouldn't know if it's in 36 months or whether it's in 20 years. But
No,
the point
the
is
fund
that
only matures
the
in 10 years'
consequence is
time.
going
But
to be...
isn't the sort of visionary long-term stuff, you know, what we lack in politics? I mean, this was part of the thinking behind the NBN and
Sure.
A price on carbon and all this. It's thinking about the future.
And it's a great thing in concept. The point is, though, that you're going to be hitting pensioners and chronically ill Australians. You're hitting them at the point when they can least afford it to pay for this fund, and that's wrong.
Julian, Lisa, what do you think about this measure? Is it worth persisting with?
Oh, yes, I think it is. I mean, I think, you know, there are behavioural changes that need to occur. I mean, I think that the cost of the Medicare system is obviously part of the reason that this is being done. I think that the benefit of having the Medical Research Fund is useful. And I think, you know, the cap of 10 visits and then you can go for free is reasonable. I think it's a fair balance.
We need to take another break. I do have another couple of questions on the budget, but I also want to talk about the Prime Minister's efforts with President Yudhoyono to get that relationship with Indonesia back on track and where he's headed on this overseas round-the-world trip. Stay with us. You're watching The Nation. Good to have you with us tonight. Before we leave the budget debate, I just want to get back to the heart of why the government's doing what it's doing, to bring spending under control, and the accusation that Labor doesn't get that and doesn't have any alternative plans. Michelle Rowland, do you think there is a spending problem that needs to be brought under control?
Well, I think that this whole notion that Steve alluded to earlier in the program, concocting this budget emergency, I think the very fact that they have doubled the size of the deficit since PFO just speaks volumes for the fact that this is a complete concoction.
But putting that to one side, do we have a spending problem?
Look, I think we have challenges. We certainly have challenges, and we always have. And that's why Labor, in its last term, put caps on the amount of spending that we said, and we said we would adhere to those. But I think it's also important to note. I think it's important to note, two things. Firstly, Steve talks about the budget, and people agree with his his points and so forth. The key thing that is coming out that is really resonating in communities is the unfairness. The notion that somehow this is full, everyone's doing their fair share. People whom I represent know that that's not the case.
No, I appreciate that's the position that Labor's taken. But just on whether we do have a problem here that needs to be addressed, I think you've said we do have challenges, but do you agree we can't continue on this spending path?
Well, Labor always wanted to, and was always part of our economic strategy to rein in spending. And it is clear that we need to have...
How should that be done?
Well, just as an example, I think that we should have this budget should be a budget that's looking to the future, that it is actually investing in innovation, that it's not doing things that are harmful,
which is great in the long term. But how do you get the spending down?
In the short term, they do end up by for example, putting a co-payment on people when they visit the doctor. That is going to very clearly discourage people who have chronic illnesses from getting the right treatments that they need, and end up costing more in hospitals at the end of it. So it's by doing things that are smarter, actually investing in preventative health, and we saw a preventative...
so spending more money would save money?
Well, if you spend it properly. There's no doubt, David, that we need to invest in areas of our economy that are going to produce growth. And that is why.
I've got to ask a question though, Michelle. You say that the co-payment's going to mean that people that are chronically ill are going to use doctor services less. Is the same the case with the co-payment on pharmaceuticals? Because if it is, then why did you introduce it?
Well, look, if that's all that you're going to put in people's backpacks, seriously, listen.
Does the co-payment on pharmaceuticals mean that people don't get their medicines?
You know perfectly well that people do get their medicines when they need them, and it's thanks to people.
So why do they do it with pharmaceuticals, but not with doctors?
It's thanks to people being managed properly through preventative health that we actually manage to have a healthier society and people who are relying less on hospital emergency departments.
Okay, so they'll pay the co-payment for their pharmaceuticals,
if I was a marginal seat Liberal MP and I was told in the speaking notes, go out and talk about Andrew Lee, go out and talk about these emails that Steve's selectively saying, I'd be pretty worried because it's quite clear that this has been roundly rejected in our local communities.
Okay, the other thing I wanted to ask about was the carbon tax, which is still to be repealed by the government. If it's not repealed, and it won't be, by July it goes up again.
Sure.
Sam, are you comfortable with that?
No, but let's take a step back and let's look at the international spectrum here. We've got China, who's introducing 7 new piloted schemes in this area. We've got the United States that's now announced that they're looking at doing something similar like this.
Hang on, not a cap and trade, an emissions trading scheme.
No, sure, but they're taking serious steps down this path. They're taking serious steps on climate change. Europe's doing the same sort of thing. The rest of the world is moving in this general direction, except for Australia, and we're taking a step back.
Well, I mean, that's completely false. The US approach is almost the same as Australia's approach under the coalition. Our emissions reduction fund mirrors what the United States has basically announced in terms of technology advances.
I wouldn't say mirrors.
Well, mirrors maybe.
Let me explain.
The point is, put it this way: there's a lot more in common with the US approach to this and the coalitions than there is to Labor's carbon tax.
Let's see if President Obama says that.
That'll be interesting. Just to be clear, the Obama plan basically puts for the first time a cap on how much power plants can emit and seeks to reduce them by 30% by 2030. Now, it's up to each state to decide how they do that, and one state might decide an emissions trading scheme is the way to go, another one might do something else, but it is putting a limit and reducing that limit on how much can be emitted nationally. That is far from what you're doing.
No, it's not, because
Well,
the
okay,
focus,
so where's the limit? Where's the cap?
The focus is upon reducing those emissions through, for example, technological advances, better energy efficiency, and that is exactly what the emissions reduction fund that the coalition has does.
Except overlaying that under Obama's model is this cap, right? This limit on how much can be emitted. Mm-hmm. You don't have that.
Well, we have a target, yes. We've got a target, and the President, which incidentally is probably powerless to enforce, but the President has said that he has a 30% limit, well, a reduction of 30%. So, you know, we've got a target, he's got a limit. I suspect his limit's unenforceable, but the point is the methodology, how you actually achieve those reductions. Basically, the two parallel. And my point is that it's not like Labor's carbon tax at all.
Well, there's no doubt, though, President Obama, Julian, has been talking up the need for greater international action on this. He's used it in that key national security speech at West Point. He does see this in security terms as much as environmental terms now as well. When Tony Abbott sits down with him next week in the White House, do you think this will be a point of tension?
Look, we have plenty of relationships with US presidents on issues where the US president will have one particular view and the Australian Prime Minister will have another view. I know Tony Abbott's also going to Canada with Stephen Harper. Stephen Harper, like Tony Abbott, opposed a carbon tax. I think we have much more in common with Canada, not just politically, but in terms of the nature of our economies, heavy dependence on mining and resources in both places. But yes, I mean, this has been an issue that President Obama has wanted to do something about. He hasn't been able to, and so he's got the few sets of executive powers that he can and put together a package. You know, that's
but we should keep in context the many areas of cooperation, of course, and the strong alliance between the two countries on the security front, what's happening in this region, on the trade front. But this may be an issue. Do you take the point, though, Michelle Rowland, that there are some similarities between the Obama plan and direct action?
No one has been able to articulate what direct action is yet. You know, the magic soil, planting trees, subsidising polluters. Look, if I was I don't think President Obama is going to go for that one. But yeah, even when you look at it, look, pricing carbon's less popular than the budget. It's more popular than the budget right now. It's more popular than the measures in the budget. Just look at any of the measurements. Look at any of the measurements.
Okay, that's a fair point. But do you think it'll still be as popular when the price goes up again in July? And are you happy to see it go up?
Well, look, we want it replaced with an emissions trading scheme. We want it replaced with a fair income emissions trading scheme. And those opposite, you know, the government side now, you know, I still haven't had any of them able. And I think we were sitting here one night with one of them at this very table. I think PVO was in the chair, and he started explaining it, and PVO said, "Stop! I understood it more before you started explaining it." So, you know, I just find it confounding, absolutely confounding, that on one hand, Steve and his friends can talk about, oh, we don't want to leave this debt to our children. We need to take action now. But they didn't want to take action when it came to pricing carbon, didn't want to take action when it came to transition in the economy, have this dog of a policy that you can't find any reputable economist or scientist to agree with.
Well, is there?
Well, David, that's a great story, Michelle. Yeah. Unfortunately, it just doesn't accord with any facts. But, you know, full points for the storing. The coalition's approach.
So which economist and which scientist?
Well,
yeah,
I mean,
Moncton, come on.
You want to give me a quick pop test? I mean, the point is, Michelle makes the claim that we're so concerned about the debt that Labor's leaving to our children, but we're not concerned about climate change. Well, actually, newsflash, we are. Our target to get a 5% reduction, guess what? Identical to Labor's target.
And how are you going to achieve it?
Reduction.
You think you're going to achieve it?
Through the $1 billion emissions reduction fund that we've put in place.
Delusional.
But so don't for a second try to verbal us and say that we're not concerned about climate change, because we are, and we're doing something about it. But more importantly, unlike your carbon tax, we've got a mandate for our approach.
We took it to the Australian people. Just like you've got the mandates for all your cuts.
We took it to the Australian people.
Just like your mandates for all your broken promises.
We're not cutting anything. That's the other point I've made.
You're not cutting anything.
That's correct.
Okay. They're not cutting anything.
Let me inject a dose of reality. You probably will reach the 5% fairly easily, as it turns out. I guess the argument is, should it be higher than 5% on both of your parts? That's what we'll have to decide.
That's a separate conversation.
I want to talk about the Prime Minister's meeting with President Yudhoyono in Indonesia, a good thing that they've both met. We're yet to see cooperation restored on a whole raft of fronts. Do you think, if we do see that cooperation return, Sam, and the code of conduct on intelligence gathering in particular, that this is some vindication of how the Abbott government have dealt with these tricky issues?
I don't know if it's a vindication. It is in everyone's interest to repair this relationship, and it's in everyone's interest to repair this relationship quickly. We've got 5 more months of SBY's presidency. He has been the most pro-Australian president of Indonesia that I think has ever been in place in that country. The next president, whoever that may be, in either case, doesn't have nearly as strong relationship with Australia as SBY does. So we need to move quickly. Today's meeting, I think, was the President's last great gift to Australia. That's fantastic. We should applaud both the Prime Minister and the President for having that meeting and coming to terms with that. But there are still those 10 suspended areas of cooperation that cover some very, very serious things that need to be rectified and rectified quickly.
If he can pull this off, the Prime Minister, I mean, without having to change his policy on asylum seeker boats, without having to apologise or guarantee we won't spy on the President and other senior figures anymore, that's not a bad outcome politically as far as Tony Abbott's concerned, is it?
Look, it's in all our interests. It's in the national interest to have a strong relationship with Indonesia. And there will be challenges that will arise in future. It remains to be seen whether some of these issues that the Indonesians have found unacceptable, things like their opposition to the boat turnback policy, what happens from here, we simply don't know. But certainly,
just on that though, I mean, clearly they don't like it, they never have. But if boats do stop, that does take that issue out of the equation a bit, doesn't it? Well,
it remains to be seen. In a normalised relationship, we're just getting it back on foot now. Last time there was a boat towback, the Prime Minister had to cancel a trip to Indonesia. What does happen in future? So I think that it's important to recognise we actually don't know where this one is going. But in the meantime, I think we all agree that it is in the national interest to have the strongest possible relationship with Indonesia.
Yeah, and Steve Ciobo, do you worry at all about what this intelligence code of conduct may include and what restraints it may pose?
No, I think that the Prime Minister has done an outstanding job in terms of defending our national interest. I agree. There's certainly been points of friction. We saw it when Labor had the knee-jerk reaction and cut off live cattle exports. We saw it when Labor opened our borders, so we had 700+ boats and 50,000 people, many of whom moved through Indonesia to get to Australia.
And the turnback policy as well.
We are now
setting about... That was a point of friction.
It was a point of friction, sure.
Territorial
it was a point of friction. But you know what? It's no longer a point of friction because the boats have stopped. It's been 180+ days since we had a successful venture into Australia. The boats have stopped. That issue is going to dissipate.
They haven't stopped leaving Indonesia, though,
well, pretty much. I mean, pretty much.
Well, only a few weeks ago. I mentioned the PM had to cancel that trip because a boat had to be turned back.
Maybe there's been the odd boat now once a month or once every 2 months.
No, I'm not saying they're coming at anything like the same
It's a bit better than the 3 a day we were getting when Labor was in power. But to go to the point, David, about the relationship, I agree with Michelle. It should be in the national interest that it's a strong relationship. We are slowly removing the obstacles that were put in our path. I think the Prime Minister's been true to our national interest, and I think the relationship will go forward.
Just on the relationship more broadly, Julian, it is such an important relationship, but it is still so underdone. Yes, it's been a bad 6 months, but this Prime Minister and those before him have always often said we want this to be a much stronger, better relationship. Why isn't it? Why is this Australia-Indonesia relationship hostage to these ups and downs?
I think there will always be points of tension, as there is in any relationship between neighbours. But I think one of the really good things that Tony Abbott has done is try to make the priority of the foreign policy, Jakarta. I mean, remember he had that slogan in the election, Jakarta, not Geneva. And the
hasn't worked out yet.
Well, I mean, there's been a bit of a speed bump on the road, but I think today's meeting and the fact, I mean, Steve is right. The fact that there haven't been boats here takes, to use a President Yudhoyono expression, the sugar off the table. That's better for Indonesia. You don't have people coming there. The security cooperation between our two countries that goes back to the time of the Bali bombing when Yudhoyono himself was security minister there. I think that's fundamentally in our national interest, first and foremost. The potential trade relationships. You know, there are so many Indonesian university students as part of the New Colombo plan, that come to study here, and there's so many Australians that are going to go over there as part of the New Colombo plan. Those things and those interpersonal relationships will have to continue to underpin.
And arguably the security and intelligence relationship is only going to become increasingly important as both sides have been acknowledging, with hardened radicals coming back from Syria into Indonesia as well as Australia, but into Indonesia in particular, that is a concern for the region. Look, we are out of time. We're going to have to wrap things up there. But Steve Ciobo, Sam Crosby, Julian, Lisa and Michelle Rowland, thank you all for joining us this week.
Thanks, David.
Thanks for your company as well. We'll be back same time next week. See you then.